Just past midnight, my stepfather forced his way into my army quarters. He crushed. My shoulder beat me until I was bleeding, and my mother watched without a word. I sent out one SOS before losing consciousness. What came after left the military speechless. The air in AIT barracks always smells the same. A sterile mix of pine sol, worn leather, and quiet exhaustion. It's the smell of a sanctuary, a place where the world outside can't touch you. Every lock is checked. The charge of quarters makes their rounds. Order is the first and last line of defense. I believed in that order. Then the handle on my door turned, a soft metallic click that broke the covenant of the entire U.S. Army. The shadow that fell across the polished linoleum floor was not a platoon sergeant. It was Richard, my stepfather, a civilian, a ghost from a life I had escaped, standing on post in a place he had no right to be. His rage was a physical presence in the room, sucking the air out. He didn't speak. He moved with a heavy, deliberate violence that was intimately familiar. The first hand on my shoulder wasn't a push, it was an anchor, pinning me to the thin mattress. A sound like wet wood splitting echoed in my own ear as the joint gave way. The pain was a white flash, a system override. He was a storm of blunt force, his grunts punctuating the sickening impacts. The world went blurry, tilting on an axis I no longer understood. But through the swimming static, I saw the doorway. Framed in the jaundiced light from the hall was my mother. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't crying, she wasn't screaming. She was a statue of consent. His fists were just crushing bone. Her silence was what broke me. It was the quiet, deliberate signature on his every action. The truest betrayal. I was on the floor then, the cold of the tile a small, sharp reality against my cheek. My head was ringing, a high-pitched siren with no source. And then I saw it. The faint, defiant glow of my phone, lying just beyond my outstretched fingers. Its screen was cracked, a spiderweb of damage, but it was on. Something colder and harder than fear took over. A flicker of my training, a mission objective in the chaos. My arm felt disconnected, a piece of equipment I had to force into action. My fingers, slick and trembling, smeared blood across the glass as I dragged it closer. There was no time for a call, no strength for a conversation, just data. A burst transmission to the one person on this base who represented structure in the face of this absolute collapse. My platoon sergeant. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. My vision tunneled. I typed two things. A name and a grid coordinate for my own life. Evans, B-204. The green checkmark of the sent message was a final, distant flare. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor. The last thing I felt wasn't the pain in my ribs or the fire in my shoulder. It was the immense, crushing weight of my mother's silence as the world finally, mercifully, went black. The first thing I registered was the light. A relentless, humming fluorescent bar that buzzed directly into my skull. It was the sterile, unforgiving light of a place where people are repaired. Then came the smell. Antiseptic and bleach, a chemical cleanness that couldn't quite scrub the coppery scent of my own blood from my senses. A shape moved in my peripheral vision, a blur of camouflage and black boots. As the world swam into focus, the pattern resolved itself into a uniform. And the uniform resolved itself into Sergeant First Class Evans. He was sitting in a chair by the bed, utterly still, as if he'd been carved from the same granite as the NCO creed. There was a flash of memory, fractured and sharp, the sound of my barracks room door splintering off its hinges. Not being kicked open, but professionally breached. Evans's voice not shouting, but a low, controlled command that cut through the haze of pain. He hadn't asked if I was okay. He had simply established a new reality, one where he was in charge. The military police arrived next. Two of them, a man and a woman, their faces impassive. They didn't handle me with pity. They handled me like a piece of evidence. The questions were blunt, sterile instruments. State your name and rank for the report. Can you identify the assailant? Was the second individual, the female, a willing participant? I answered in a voice I didn't recognize, a dry whisper. My eyes were fixed on the worn linoleum tiles, counting the scuffs, tracing the cracks. Every click of the MP's ballpoint pen felt like a judgment being written into my permanent record. This wasn't my story anymore. It was an incident report, SFC Evans escorted me from the TMC to the company headquarters. He didn't say a word, just walked a step behind me and to the left, a silent, imposing shadow. The walk felt a mile long. Every soldier we passed seemed to stare, their eyes burning holes in the thin hospital gown they'd given me. Captain Miller's office was exactly what you'd expect. Polished oak desk, flags standing at perfect attention in the corners, a nameplate that read CPT Miller. He stood as I entered. He was a young officer, but his eyes held the weight of old decisions. He listened to the MP's brief, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Then, he nodded once. "That'll be all. Sergeant Evans, wait outside." The door clicked shut, and the silence in the room was absolute. I braced myself for the lecture, for the questions about how I'd let civilians onto the post, for the quiet disappointment. He let the silence hang for a moment, then leaned forward, his hands flat on his desk. He looked me straight in the eye. "Sharma, what happened to you was a breach, not just of this post, but of our trust." His voice was low, devoid of emotion, but carried the force of a command. "Richard is not welcome here. Your mother is not welcome here. This stops now. We have you." It wasn't an offer of comfort. It was a statement of fact, a tactical reassessment. He hadn't called it a tragedy or an assault. He called it a breach. He took my private, suffocating shame and redefined it in the language of his world. Our world. One tear, hot and heavy, escaped and tracked a clean path through the grime on my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of impossible, earth-shattering relief. Captain Miller's words built a wall around me, but they didn't heal what was inside. For that, I needed a different kind of sanctuary. I found it behind a 6-inch thick vault door in a windowless room known as a skiff. A sensitive, compartmented information facility. No daylight, no outside noise. Just the low, steady hum of servers and the cool, conditioned air. This was the forge. This was where they taught us 35 foxtrots, intelligence analysts, to turn chaos into clarity. For everyone else, it was a classroom. For me, it was the only place I could breathe. The pain from my shoulder became a dull, constant ache. I learned to use it. It was a metronome, a reminder to focus. While other trainees complained about the long hours, I welcomed them. The endless streams of raw data, signal intercepts, drone footage, informant reports, became a river that carried me away from the memory of that barracks room. My life narrowed to a single point, the screen in front of me. I devoured the curriculum. Pattern analysis, threat assessment, network mapping. It was the architecture of control. I learned to build a profile on an enemy I'd never met, to predict their movements from scraps of digital exhaust. Every correct answer, every successful brief, was another layer of armor. There was a specialist from Texas, a fast talker who was top of the class. He saw the competition in my eyes. He didn't know he wasn't competing against him. He was competing against the ghosts in my head, and they made me relentless. On the firing range, my focus became unnervingly sharp. My breathing would slow. The world would shrink to the front sight post. My groupings were tight, precise. I wasn't just hitting the target anymore. I was trying to obliterate it. The quiet, controlled violence was a release valve for the rage that had nowhere else to go. Then came the capstone exercise. The final FTX. Our entire class, locked in the skiff for a 72-hour simulated intelligence marathon. We were flooded with information, a torrent designed to test our ability to find the signal in the noise. My team was focused on the obvious threats, the increased radio chatter, the known enemy positions. The specialist from Texas was already mapping IED emplacement patterns. But I was drawn to the silence, to the gaps in the data. Growing up, I had learned that the most dangerous threats weren't in the shouting. They were in the quiet that came right before. I ignored the primary channels and dove into the background static, the terabytes of garbage data everyone else had filtered out. And there it was. A faint, almost imperceptible pulse. A communications anomaly that appeared at irregular intervals, but always in a repeating sequence. It wasn't random. It was a heartbeat. I worked for hours, mapping the source, cross-referencing it with terrain data. It was their command node, hiding in plain sight, using a frequency so low it was almost invisible. I stood up and walked my findings to the lead instructor, a grizzled staff sergeant with eyes that missed nothing. He looked at my screen, his expression a mask of skepticism. He followed my logic, his finger tracing the lines I'd drawn. The room went quiet. He stood back from my station and turned to the rest of the class. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Sharma ignored the firefight to find the enemy's brain stem. He pointed to my screen. This signal. This is how their commander talks to his cells. Finding this doesn't just stop one attack. It prevents a catastrophic ambush. It dismantles the entire network. A silence fell over the room. For the first time since that night, a feeling that wasn't rage or numbness bloomed in my chest. It was heavy, solid. It was pride. At the AIT graduation ceremony, they called my name for honor graduate. When the plaque was placed in my hands, its weight felt earned. It was the first piece of a new foundation, one I had forged myself in darkness and silence. Fort Huachuca was a sterile bubble of theory and simulation. My first breath at FOB Vigilance was a mouthful of dust, heat, and the ever-present smell of diesel fumes. The war wasn't a concept here. It was a constant, low-grade fever. My new home was the S2 shop, the intelligence hub for an entire infantry battalion. A cramped, over-air-conditioned box of radios and monitors, buzzing with the controlled chaos of the Joint Operations Center. I was no longer a trainee. I was Specialist Sharma, the new analyst, another fresh face from the States who had to prove she wasn't a liability. My officer in charge was a young lieutenant, barely older than me, with a fresh haircut, and the kind of textbook confidence that hasn't been tested by reality yet. He'd glance at my intel summaries, nod, and then turn to the senior NCO for confirmation. To him, I was just a pair of hands to sort data, so I let my work speak for me. My briefs were short, precise, and accurate. I spent my 12-hour shifts glued to the screens, watching drone feeds until my eyes burned, parsing signal intercepts for any deviation from the norm. I learned the rhythm of the battlefield, the subtle ebb and flow of enemy activity. I was reliable. I was competent, but I was still the new specialist. Then came the convoy. Griffin 4, a routine supply run up a route that had been quiet for months. In the JOC, the mood was relaxed. It was a milk run, a box to be checked. I was on watch, monitoring the chatter, the digital heartbeat of the operation. And then I saw it. It wasn't on the primary channels. It was in the background noise, the digital static everyone else ignored. A faint, coded signal, flickering for a split second before vanishing. It didn't match any known enemy TTPs. It was unstructured, almost invisible. And it was terrifyingly familiar. It felt like the ghost signal from my final exercise at AIT. "Sir," I said, turning to the lieutenant, "I've got a non-standard signal burst, 5 clicks ahead of Griffin 4's current position." He glanced at my screen, his brow furrowed with annoyance. "It's probably just atmospheric interference, specialist. The comms out here are garbage. Stay focused on the primary threat matrix." He dismissed it. Dismissed me. And in that moment, I faced a choice: my career or their lives. The lieutenant, my direct superior, had given me an order, but the cold certainty in my gut told me he was wrong. I pulled up the convoy roster. The lead vehicle commander was Sergeant First Class Evans. My blood ran cold. Fate has a twisted sense of humor. I didn't hesitate. I bypassed the platoon net, switching my headset to the command channel. The entire JOC went quiet as my voice cut through the air. "Griffin Lead, this is Vigilance S2 with a priority message. Halt your convoy. I say again, halt your convoy now." The lieutenant was on his feet, his face white with rage. "Specialist, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I held up a hand, my eyes locked on the radio, waiting. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then Evan's voice, calm and clear, crackled back. "Vigilance S2, Griffin Lead copies. We are halting." He didn't question it. He trusted the call. The EOD team found it 300 meters from where the convoy stopped. 3 155mm artillery shells, daisy-chained and command-detonated. It would have vaporized the lead vehicle and everyone in it. At the debriefing that evening, the battalion commander stood before the entire command staff. He didn't look at the lieutenant. His eyes found me where I stood in the back of the room. "Specialist Sharma's uncommon instinct," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "And her disregard for complacency is the only reason the men of Griffin 4 are with us tonight." From across the room, SFC Evans met my gaze. He gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't praise. It was acknowledgement. The invisible wall between me and the rest of the team dissolved. I wasn't the new specialist anymore. I was the analyst who listened to the silence. I had a formal ceremony to attend later that day, which is the only reason I was wearing my dress uniform. The Army service uniform isn't designed for comfort. It's designed for order, for structure. It felt appropriate. The lawyer's office was quiet, smelling of old paper and stale coffee. In front of me was a stack of documents, dense with legal jargon, but I only saw one thing: his name. Richard. 2 years ago, that name was a physical threat. A year ago, it was a haunting echo. Today, it was just black ink on a page, a target to be neutralized by the stroke of a pen. The lawyer slid the final page toward me. "Sergeant Sharma, if you'll sign here." My hand was steady as I took the pen. There was no tremor, no hesitation. I saw the girl on the floor of that barracks room, her hand shaking as she typed out a desperate text. This signature was for her. I pressed the nib to the paper and officially rendered him a ghost, a non-entity legally barred from my existence. On my chest, the ribbon for my Army Commendation Medal felt heavier than the medal itself. It wasn't a medal for what happened to me. It was for what I did after. It was a testament to listening to the silence and finding the threat hidden within, a permanent record of my value. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun, and she was there, waiting on the bottom step, looking smaller than I remembered. Time had been unkind to her, etching new lines of anxiety around her eyes and mouth. She saw the uniform first, then me inside it. She rushed forward, her hands fluttering nervously. "Zara," she began, her voice thin and reedy. I saw the notice. I had to come." I said nothing. I just stood there, letting her fill the silence, a skill she had inadvertently taught me. "I was just so scared of him," she finally whispered, the words tumbling out in a pathetic rush. "You have to understand. He had so much control. I was terrified." I listened to the excuse I had waited 2 years to hear. I felt nothing. No rage, no pity, just a vast, quiet emptiness, the space where a daughter's love used to be. My eyes drifted down from her face to the splash of color on my uniform, the Arcom. I touched the edge of the ribbon with my fingertips. "I was scared too," I said. My voice was calm, level. It was the same tone I used to deliver an intelligence brief. The difference is, when my life was on the line, I found my voice. I let that hang in the air between us, a final, undeniable truth. I looked back at her face, and for the first time I saw her not as my mother, but as a stranger I used to know. "I'm sorry you never found yours." I didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing else to say. I turned, my back straight, my shoulders squared, and walked away. The sharp, rhythmic sound of my own heels striking the pavement was the only sound that mattered. It was the sound of a chapter, finally, mercifully, closing. A few weeks later, I stood on the parade ground at Fort Cavazos. The Texas sun was just starting to burn off the morning haze, casting long shadows from the soldiers standing in perfect formation. It was a familiar scene, a ritual of order and discipline I had come to rely on. But today was different. The company first sergeant called my name. Specialist, front and center. My boots echoed on the pavement as I walked forward, halting in front of Captain Miller. He was smiling, a genuine smile of pride that reached his eyes. Standing beside him was Sergeant First Class Evans, holding a small piece of black and gold cloth in his hand. My new rank. As per tradition, my senior NCO was the one to pin me. SFC Evans stepped forward. He carefully removed the specialist patch from my collar, a small, quiet gesture that felt like closing a book. Then he took the sergeant stripes, the chevrons of a non-commissioned officer, and pressed them into the fabric, the sharp pins anchoring my future to my uniform. He leaned in close, his voice a low, gravelly tone meant only for me. "You earned this, Sharma. Now go be the leader for them that you needed back then." He stepped back. I executed a crisp about face. I was no longer facing my commanders. I was facing my soldiers, my squad. For the first time, these were my troops, my responsibility. My eyes scanned their faces, young, tired, determined. And then my gaze locked onto a private in the front rank. A young woman, barely 19, with a nervous uncertainty in her eyes that I recognized as if it were my own reflection in a mirror 2 years ago. In that instant, the entire purpose of my past clicked into place. All the pain, the silence, the fight to be seen. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was a training manual. My trauma had been forged into a tool, not for me, but for them. It was my job now to build a command climate where no soldier, male or female, ever felt so alone that their only hope was a one-word text message. My stepfather and my mother tried to write me out of my own story, to make me a silent footnote in theirs. But I found my voice in the roar of a C-17 and my strength in the trust of my unit. They wanted to see me broken. Instead, they get to see me lead. If anyone has ever tried to silence you or write your ending for you, tell me in the comments how you picked up the pen and wrote your own.